and gentlemen, this is Cynthia the Audio Bell, and I am back again for another video about the MiniDSP SHD. I did a previous video on an initial review of this component, and if you have not seen it yet, then please go and take a look at it. These videos that I'm doing now are kind of my final thoughts on the product after having it for a few months in my system and tinkering with it. So I wanted to release a few videos of just some things that I've learned about the product over time of playing with this toy and different things like that. And this one in particular is going to be about bass. And who doesn't like bass? So once upon a time, I didn't really care for bass, at least the type of bass that a subwoofer could produce. I was more about the mid bass area, as far as that's what I really cared about, even a little bit up from there, because a lot of what I listened to was classic rock. So Zans Can't Dance by John Fogerty, I really liked the drums in that, or Johnny Moon by Heart, the drums in that, those kinds of drums and that type of bass, which isn't inherently super deep like a lot of the music that we have today. A lot of the modern music has deeper bass. It extends down to where it's not super audible to hear in person. If you're listening to a drum, it's not like the drum is actually necessarily that loud in person per se, but that's kind of what we have in a lot of our modern music. Same with like the male voice, where you hear a lot of those lower tones. So at first I didn't really care for again, a subwoofer. I didn't care to have it in my system. I thought my Magnepans were just la creme de la creme, and they didn't need a subwoofer. And then I was at an audio show and I heard a song called Celestial Echo by an artist named Malia. And that song has such deep bass. At least in my opinion, at the time, it was super deep bass. Now I've heard stuff that has had deeper bass extension than that since then, but it has such deep bass, and the rumble kind of effect from that particular song just wasn't happening with my Magnepans when I came home and tried to listen to them. Now that is with the 3.7i's, those are what I have currently installed. But I have heard that song with the 3.6s, and I've heard it with the 1.7s, and honestly it sounded better on the 1.7s and the 3.6s than it does on the 3.7s. So I couldn't figure out why that just was not there. That particular sound that I was looking for in the song was not happening. Back then, I was using REW with a Behringer feedback destroyer to get started into the equalization scene and the digital audio scene as far as streaming and different things go. After measuring what the speakers were producing, it was really easy to see that in the 65 to 75 hertz range, there was just a huge dip. It was not producing sound. So what did I do? I equalized it up to balance it out and get the speakers to push something that they just couldn't push. You'll have to excuse my French, but to put this very delicately, the speakers sounded like they were farting. Now, given that was happening, it was either that I was having a standing wave in the room, the speakers had a problem, or just the 3.7s in general had some sort of issue like with that particular model. So I wasn't sure what was happening, and at that point I knew I couldn't play that range on these speakers. So I kind of gave up trying to EQ them. Now I have a subwoofer in my system, and it was after I got married to Jeremy that we integrated one. But the funny thing was, before we got married, I was giving him advice on different equipment to purchase, and I explained that he should purchase a Sioux Research subwoofer. Now, the Sioux Research subwoofers is something that the Audiophiliac actually recommended to me at Axpona a few years ago. He said I had to go check out the Sioux Research Room and meet Dr. Sioux and hear his subwoofers. And when I heard them, I fell in love with them. He was playing a trailer or a clip from Aquaman, and that rumble when Aquaman hit the ocean floor. I've never seen the movie before, but the clip was enough. When he hit the ocean floor, there was this rumble that you could feel in the room, and I never heard a subwoofer that sounded that clean and tight and yet still gave you the effect of feeling something. So that's what I recommended to him, and it was based off of maybe a few different subs that I had listened to, and that being my pick. And so he ended up purchasing it. There's also a lot of other nice audio equipment that I ended up recommending to him, just so that, you know, when we get married, I'd be able to have all of this awesome equipment. Don't tell him that. He still thinks that we got married because of his good looks and his charm. So even though this subwoofer was something that I had recommended to Jeremy, I was super skeptical about implementing it into my own system because I thought these 3.7s should produce something that they're not producing. And my thought was, why should I add something when these 3.7s should be doing the job? And it's probably just the room, or, you know, I didn't really know what it was. We ended up integrating it, and even though I was skeptical, we've had this C Research subwoofer in the mix for 1.5 years now, since we got married. And at this point, now I cannot turn it off because it's very noticeable. It just, the whole sound of anything I listen to lacks. It lacks something. It lacks a foundation. There's just a very noticeable quality of it sounding radio-esque. It sounds flat. You can tell when it's not there. So rewind to about the time we got married, we integrated this. Now we listened to it without EQ, and it sounded horrible. It sounded muddy. It was very sloppy, and it sounded like a subwoofer, and you could tell it was a subwoofer. So we EQ'd it, and it was a little better, but I never really got super used to it. And then the Behringer feedback destroyer was just kind of old, so we had some inherent issues with that. The EQ situation, we couldn't get it exactly right, or at least like I would expect that it should sound, which would be very balanced and seamless, not where you're actually noticing that the subwoofer exists in the room, but you should not notice that it exists. It should be one with your speakers in a way where you don't notice the speakers, you don't notice the subwoofer, you're just listening to music and you're not worried about that. And it wasn't quite that way, but it still sounded better than it did without the subwoofer. Finally, just more recently, we got the MiniDSP SHD, and with its Dirac capabilities, I set up several microphones in this fantastic array of complicated looking wires everywhere. No, it was just setting up a microphone in multiple different positions and measuring in an elaborate looking way, but it wasn't actually that hard. Once I took the measurements, let Dirac do the job of EQing, and then bam, sounded a lot better than I had ever heard it. So while I was super skeptical at first, once we incorporated the MiniDSP SHD with its Dirac functionality to EQ the subwoofer with the Magnepan 3.7s, it was the best that I've ever heard my system, and everything did appear to be really seamless. In fact, I had more trouble with some stuff with my right channel than I had with integrating the subwoofer. And that's just because there's multiple different reasons I have trouble with my right channel, but one of them is sound is escaping through a hallway here that leads to my front door. Whereas on the left side, as you can see, I have a fireplace and a mantle. Speaking of which, you can see I have a ton of glass on this mantle. I have so much glass, I can't fit any in china cabinets anymore because there's just no more space for glass. So I'm a glass collector. But anyway, before EQing with Dirac and just using no EQ at all, this glass would rattle, and it was horrible to listen to because it interfered with your listening experience. And I even had one of my glass pieces fall off of the mantle and break. And then you can see below the mantle, there's a space here, or a gap that we had to shim because we could hear vibrating because of that as well. After EQing it, glass doesn't rattle so much anymore. Now, if we were to bump up the decibels on the low end, which sometimes we do, then it kind of gets there. I would say that about 5 dB is about as much as we can bump up the bottom end before we start to hear glass rattle from the mantle. And for the most part, those are going to be the modern electronic songs that have computer generated elements to them and are super bassy. Now, not all of them are suffering from this issue, but the ones that just have way too much bass incorporated in them, they can suffer from that as far as things rattling in my house. I mean, I've even heard something from the kitchen start to move around, and I don't even know what that was. I would say that this is the best that I've ever heard streaming so far. I've heard streaming at audio shows, and really that's not always a good representation given that they're hotel rooms and not everybody picks the perfect hotel room for their equipment, nor is it always the best acoustically, or did they bring acoustical treatment, or even if they do, sometimes it just doesn't work out. I feel like something like this would fix that, because this is a really worst case scenario room with reflections everywhere. I've got wood floors, I've got hard, walls with no diffusion, no absorption. I've got nothing acoustically treated in here. Now I do have some bookshelves back there that could act as diffusers. And then I've got some record shelves here. Maybe they act as diffusers a little bit, but the records are kind of crammed in there for the most part because I have so many. But it's not acoustically treated. This is probably the worst case scenario, and yet that device has helped me to hear the best streaming experience that I've ever heard. So as far as the streaming platform that I'm using Tidal for the most part. Now I did try Roon since the video I posted of the review of the MiniDSP, and I found out, because I thought it was just another streaming platform like Tidal or Qobuz, but I found out it's actually a central management hub that you can use to manage your streaming apps like Tidal, Qobuz. You can even upload files to it. If you have any DSD files like we do, we were able to upload those there. So we're able to manage all of this stuff and search for it all within just one centralized app. And you can search for a song, and it doesn't matter what app it's from. If you have different apps tied into Roon, then it will search all of the apps for a particular song, and then you push play and it just plays from one of the apps that particular recording is on. So that's really cool. Now I do feel that their search feature is lacking a little bit, but it has been, I don't know, a couple of months since I used it. I was on, I think, the free trial, I forget. So they could have updated something since a couple of months ago, I don't know. But I feel like the search feature was kind of inferior to Tidal's. Not all the time did something come up properly, and not all the time did something come up. So if you were looking for a song that maybe wasn't so popular, something that was more, I don't know, not well known, then you might have a little bit of trouble searching for it with Roon, from what I learned. But the weird thing was, things sounded better through Roon. Even if it was a recording from Tidal, it sounded better in Roon than it sounded in Tidal. And I don't know why that was, but that seemed to be pretty consistent with everything I had listened to a couple of months ago. But as far as my main streaming platform at the moment, I'm using Tidal. I do have one thing to complain about, but before I start complaining, I'm going to tell you what I like about Tidal. What I like about Tidal is the quality of the recordings. So it may be FLAC file, it may be different resolution depending on what you're listening to, what song you're listening to, what they have available, but I've never noticed an issue with resolution and clarity of the songs and quality of the recordings. Some of the tracks I've compared side by side with records that I have, and there's been tracks where I actually thought the streamed copy sounded way better than the vinyl record. Now there's been times where it's been the other way around. It's just really depended on the song or album and the recording, the pressing of vinyl, all of that stuff. But there's been times where the streaming has sounded better, and that's a good thing. Now, I'm the kind of person who I like analog better than I like digital. But now I'm getting into that realm of thinking where I've got to get out of that stuck way that I have of vinyl's better than digital, because while I do believe that, I also believe that it depends on the recording, the vinyl pressing, and there's times where streaming can sound better than vinyl, and there's times where vinyl can sound better than streaming, and the one that I prefer is analog. And yet right now I'm really not liking the analog side of my system due to some issues that I've been having. I'm actually preferring digital at the moment, but you know, that could change tomorrow. Now, complaint-wise, when I'm using the MiniDSP, as far as the volume controls, I use a remote control for the device. Now, if I'm playing Tidal from my phone, which is more convenient than carrying around a laptop, in my opinion, or having to go into my office and use the desktop, because then you can't see what you're playing, you're in a different room. But I use my phone because it's portable, and I can just pull up my playlist of songs or my collection of songs and play music. The problem is that if I want to control the volume with the MiniDSP remote, my phone will not allow me to do that if the screen is not locked. So if my screen is not asleep and it's in the Tidal app, then the control has to be done through your iPhone, if you have an iPhone. I have an iPhone, and I don't know if it's inherently an iPhone issue or a Tidal issue. So just making that clear, it could be an issue with iPhone. I have to turn up the volume on my phone. So like I'm here with Tidal, I have to unlock my screen, and then I have to turn up and down the volume on my phone to adjust it if the screen's unlocked. Now the problem with that is that if I turn it up one notch, it's too loud. If I turn it down one notch, then it's too soft. There's no in between. It's a huge jump in a volume change when I use my phone controls to do that. I can use the remote control, but again, I have to then lock my phone, use the remote control, and then when I want to change the music, if say the next thing that plays I don't want to hear, or I just decide to play something else, unlock my phone, and then it's going to be adjusting the volume to what my phone controls are set to. So then after I choose my song, I have to lock the screen and then readjust the volume again. That is the most annoying thing that is the worst thing that I've had to deal with this streaming with Tidal and the iPhone. Now you can work around that if you want to use Tidal on your laptop. That's not going to be an issue because your computer digital volume controls are not working the same as your iPhone ones or what's on your phone. So you can work around this if you have Tidal installed on your laptop, which I do, and that's fine. Some other things that I've had issues with though are, I think it was regardless of whether I'm using it on the phone or on my laptop, if I try to skip ahead to a particular part of the music, then it just freezes up, and sometimes I have to reload Tidal. So I don't know if that's a Tidal thing or a Volumio thing, because Volumio is ultimately behind the scenes playing the music. So while I hope these things are fixed, again, I don't know where the issue lies to be able to discern if it's something that's going to come out in a iPhone fix, or if iPhone's even going to care about that, if it's going to be a Tidal thing. And then for the skipping ahead issue, whether that's a Tidal thing or a Volumio thing. So a lot of different variables there, and overall it's an annoyance, but it's something that I'm willing to get over because so far I really like Tidal. It's not going to affect me having Tidal, especially since I don't know who's to blame for these problems. So I'm going to stick with Tidal because otherwise they've been really great. And I've really enjoyed listening to music off of Tidal. And again, this is the best streaming experience I've had. And I can't reiterate that enough, given that I'm not really a streaming type of girl in the first place, but now I actually like streaming. So there's that. So what type of bass do you guys like? Do you like deep bass extension, the kind that makes things in your house rumble? And figuratively speaking, of course, nobody wants to hear glass rumbling, obviously. But do you like to feel deep bass as if a drum is being hit and you could just feel the pressure of that? Do you like to feel the pluck of a double bass? Or are you more of a mid-bass type of person and you don't really care too much about the deep bass extension because you feel it's more unrealistic? And how has your preferences for bass impacted your purchases and therefore the response of lower end sound in your system? Let me know in the comments box. I would be really interested to hear your preferences, what you like. And if you like these videos, if you find them entertaining or informative, then feel free to like, subscribe, and again, let me know your opinions.